Brexit, the decision to leave the European Union, has been one of the most significant events in recent British history. The United Kingdom voted to leave the EU in 2016, and the process was finally completed in 2020. However, the decision to leave the EU has come at a high cost for the UK. Recent research has found that the country has lost billions in trade and tax revenues as a result of the decision. In this video, we will take a closer look at the economic impact of Brexit on the UK and the research findings that have been released. One of the major costs of Brexit has been a loss of trade with EU countries. Before Brexit, the UK had a unique relationship with the EU, allowing for the free flow of goods and services. This meant that UK businesses had access to a market of over 500 million consumers and could trade with EU countries with minimal tariffs and other trade barriers. However, with the UK outside of the EU, businesses are now facing tariffs and other trade barriers when exporting to EU countries. This has led to a decline in exports and a reduction in economic growth. According to the Office for National Statistics, UK exports to the EU fell by 21% in the first quarter of 2021 compared to the same period in 2020. This decline in exports has had a significant impact on UK businesses, particularly in the manufacturing and automotive sectors. These industries rely heavily on exports to the EU and have been hit hard by the loss of access to the EU market. Furthermore, UK businesses are also facing new non-tariff barriers, such as customs and regulatory checks, which have increased the cost of trading with the EU. These new barriers have made it more difficult and expensive for UK businesses to trade with the EU and have led to a decline in trade. In addition to lost trade, the UK has also seen a decline in tax revenues as a result of Brexit. With less economic activity, the government is collecting less in taxes. This has led to a budget deficit and increased pressure on public services. The research estimates that the UK has lost billions in tax revenues since the decision to leave the EU. According to a report by the Institute for Fiscal Studies, the UK's budget deficit could reach £270 billion by the end of 2021, which is the highest level since World War II. This is largely due to the economic impact of the pandemic and Brexit. The report also states that the UK's tax revenues are likely to be £70 billion lower in 2021 than they were in 2019, primarily due to the decline in economic activity caused by Brexit. Furthermore, the UK's GDP growth has also been affected by Brexit. According to the Office for Budget Responsibility, the UK's GDP is expected to be 3% lower in 2021 than it would have been if the UK had not left the EU. This decline in GDP growth has led to a decline in tax revenues, which has put pressure on public services. In recent months, several research findings have been released that provide more insight into the economic impact of Brexit on the UK. One of the most notable findings is from the Centre for Economic Performance at the London School of Economics. The research estimates that the UK's GDP is likely to be 7.6% lower in the long term as a result of Brexit. This represents a loss of £135 billion per year, which is equivalent to £2,000 per household. Another research from the Institute for Government estimates that the UK will lose £70 billion in tax revenues over the next 5 years as a result of Brexit. This is primarily due to the decline in economic activity caused by the loss of access to the EU market and the new trade barriers that UK businesses are facing. A report from the Confederation of British Industry also found that Brexit has led to increased costs for UK businesses, particularly in the form of new customs and regulatory checks. These increased costs have made it more difficult and expensive for UK businesses to trade with the EU, which has led to a decline in trade. In addition to these findings, research from the National Institute of Economic and Social Research has estimated that the UK's GDP could be as much as 3% lowered in the long term as a result of Brexit. This represents a loss of £60 billion per year, which is equivalent to £900 per household. The economic impact of Brexit on the UK is clear. The country has lost billions in trade and tax revenues, leading to a decline in economic growth and increased pressure on public services. Research has estimated that the UK's GDP could be as much as 7.6% lower in the long term as a result of Brexit, representing a loss of £135 billion per year. It remains to be seen what the long-term effects of Brexit will be, but for now, the cost to the UK is significant. It's important to note that the research findings discussed in this video are estimates and projections, and the actual impact of Brexit on the UK economy may be different. However, these findings do provide a clear picture of the potential costs of Brexit on the UK economy and the potential impact on businesses and households. Thanks for watching another episode of Europe Disaster. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more in-depth coverage of the latest European news and events. We'll see you in the next one.